Spoiler warning, obviously. Star Wars The Force Awakens was probably the most anticipated movie of all time. In fact, the word anticipated doesn't describe it properly. A more accurate description would be, "Oh my God!" Basically, this movie was being hyped as a transcendent experience, a movie that could bring world peace, end hunger and malnutrition, and be perfect with not a single flaw or complaint, because heaven forbid a Star Wars movie be just good. A lot of this is due to expectations and speculation, something I personally feel is damaging to the movie-going experience. My goal with this analysis is to discuss not just the events of the film, my likes and dislikes and cool tidbits, but also talk about the effect Star Wars has on people. Myself, others, and what that can mean. So let's get started. I loved this movie.
What?
Yeah, it was my favorite movie of 2015.
Well, then you are lost!
It was almost inevitable that a film being praised as the second coming before it was even seen by anyone would likely disappoint people. When you build something up in your mind and mull over it, coming up with theories and desires of what you'd personally like to see, it's easy to be let down by everything that doesn't meet those expectations. Upon my first viewing, I left disappointed that I didn't get more Luke Skywalker. I sat in my car having loved the experience, but annoyed that Luke was in the film for 1 minute. I could already see the internet comments. OMG, Luke was in the movie for 5 seconds and didn't say anything. Worst movie ever. It wasn't until I sat down and began to take notes for my review that I realized I had the completely wrong viewpoint. Why was I disappointed in the lack of Luke? Did J.J. Abrams ever say that Luke had a significant role in the film? Was Luke ever notably included in any of the trailers or marketing? No, he wasn't. In fact, Mark Hamill didn't even do interviews or any press tours. I was saddened by a lack of Luke because I had built an expectation in my brain of what I personally wanted to see without realizing that Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams weren't telling that story at all. I came to the conclusion that what Abrams had done was actually admirably brave, especially as such a huge fan of Star Wars. I mean, think about it. This is a guy who grew up playing with action figures of Luke Skywalker, and now he has a chance to direct a movie with him? And what does he do? Tell a new story with new characters.
Hey, Chris, you said a new story. It's not a new story. It's the same retread of...
Yeah, we'll get to that. Don't worry. Where was I? Oh yeah, he made a movie with new, compelling characters. As a monumental Star Wars fan, his choice to limit Luke's appearance was very wise and surprisingly restrained. In the end, I really respected him for it. Now please keep in mind that I'm not suggesting that our expectations being subverted is always a positive thing. I had all kinds of ideas for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Colossal Disappointment, and they were all better than what we actually got. I'm just highlighting that unrealistic expectations can be harmful and unhealthy for a movie-going experience. When this picture of Luke leaked onto the net, thousands of websites published it, hoping to make a ton of ad revenue, ruining the discovery and surprise. I wonder if after seeing the movie and realizing Luke was only involved for 1 minute, if any of these websites felt they had made a mistake. I can only hope, because they did. Anyway, let's switch it up a little bit for this review. Normally I talk about the pros first, things I liked about the movie, and I discuss what I didn't like, the cons, last. But since some very thoughtful people out there have kindly suggested that I was oblivious to The Force Awakens containing any flaws...
You fanboy piece of shit. All you like is Captain America and lightsabers.
Biased, asshole. Face it, it sucked. Go watch Transformers again, Chris. Keep sucking J.J. Abrams' cock.
I thought I'd discuss what I didn't like about The Force Awakens first. Here we go. The CGI Rathtars. They're never shown in close-up, but they just look artificial to me. I like the sequence, but not their look. They reminded me of that Men in Black slug that was eating the back of the train. Maz Kanata. She kinda looks like a dried-up apricot. She reminds me of the prequels. Ew, Snoke. He confused me. Was he a giant monster or just a hologram being projected giant? I'm thinking he was just being projected giant. Also, the CGI for him is inexcusably mediocre. Now this is the big one for me. Return of the Jedi having a second Death Star pushed it. Starkiller Base was basically a third one. It felt shoehorned in as a big weapon for the Resistance to battle. I didn't care when it blew up the planets, and I didn't care when the base exploded. It was unnecessary. Poe's rapid explanation for his disappearance. It was lazy writing that felt thrown in at the last minute to accommodate Poe's return to the screenplay, because Abrams has confirmed he was originally killed off in the beginning. R2 coming to life to provide the map to Luke felt convenient to me, although, upon further thought, it seems there is most definitely a logical explanation involving Rey's presence, BB-8 saying the right thing, and Luke possibly releasing a hold he had placed on R2. The two times that a character acknowledges familial ties felt overdramatic, with pauses and inflections that actually seemed like they were telling the audience. And lastly, John Williams' score disappointed me. Rey's theme was the only memorable new piece, and most of the action cues felt kind of phoned in. This could be due to a health issue he faced last year. Bridge of Spies was the first Spielberg movie in decades he was unable to compose for, and I felt his soundtrack may have been rushed. And that's about it. I basically loved everything else. The Force Awakens reminded me why I love movies. It reached out of the screen, grabbed my shoulder, shook me, and said, "Hey, movies are awesome, aren't they?" By far, the major complaint thrown at The Force Awakens is that it borrowed too much from A New Hope, because the seventh film in a franchise that started in the 1970s that followed a similar formula as the first couldn't possibly be any good, right? Oh, I guess it could. Is this fair criticism? If so many people seem to think it is, then it must be, right? Well, that is the day and age we live in. Thumbs up on a comment, or the amount of shares an article gets, or the Rotten Tomatoes consensus seems to decide that an opinion is right or wrong. When I was a kid, a popular saying was, "Of course it's true. I saw it on TV." Now it's evolved into, "Of course I'm right. Look how many other people agree with me." Nearly every single franchise in existence has a formula, and most sequels within a franchise follow a similar formula, simply changing a few elements to help differentiate it from its predecessors. A prime example of this would be the Indiana Jones franchise. If you've been watching my videos for some time, you know that the original Indiana Jones trilogy is one of my favorite things on planet Earth. They inspired me heavily as a kid, and even more so as an adult. But let's be honest, they're all the same movies. Indiana Jones starts his adventure by obtaining something valuable, then eventually losing it. In Raiders, it's the idol. In Temple, it's the remains of Nurhaci. In Crusade, it's the Cross of Coronado. Kingdom of Who Gives a Shit actually changed this formula up by introducing the main villain, the supporting villain, and the aliens in its opening scene. Then he meets a woman, whether it's Marion, Willie, or Elsa. Again, Kingdom changed this by saving Marion for later. Then they're somehow informed of a new MacGuffin and must search for it. Raiders had the Ark, Temple had the Shankara Stones, Crusade had the Holy Grail, and Kingdom has the Skull. There's always a scene with some kind of creepy crawly, whether it's snakes, bugs, rats, or ants. Eventually, the woman becomes a damsel in distress. Marion gets captured, so does Willie, so does Elsa, and in Kingdom, Marion was already captured from the start. There's always a bare-knuckle fist fight with the supporting villain. Raiders has the airplane fight. Temple has the conveyor belt fight. Crusade has the tank fight. Kingdom has the big Russian dude. There is always a scene where Indy gets his ass kicked to near death before finally coming out on top. In Raiders, he gets shot, pummeled, and dragged behind a truck. Then he punches the Nazi real hard. In Temple, he gets whipped, beaten, and voodooed. Then he punches the thuggy real hard. In Crusade, he gets dragged by a tank and hit with a shovel. Then he punches Vogel real hard. In Kingdom, well, Indy's pretty much on top of things the entire time, and this vulnerability isn't on display. There's always a big chase scene to start the third act. The truck chase, the minecart chase, the tank chase, the jungle chase. And once the MacGuffin is found, it always kills the bad guy. Belloc opens the Ark, Mola Ram falls to his death trying to catch the stones, Donovan drinks from the Grail, Spalko wants too much fucking knowledge. See? They're all the same movie. But did you notice something? The only film in the franchise that attempted to change the formula in a few ways is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it's by far the worst one. Huh. Many dislike Indiana Jones 4, myself included, but were unable to explain exactly why. In truth, it messed with the successful formula too much. It didn't feel like an Indiana Jones movie, because it actually did try to do something different every once in a while. It just didn't do it well, like 3 other movies that we'll talk about soon. And don't worry, I'll bring all of this Indiana Jones talk back to Star Wars very soon, but first, let's go back to 1989. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade had just come out, and initial reviews stated that the film was essentially a copy of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Many viewed Temple of Doom as too dark and violent, and while it followed the same basic formula of Raiders, aesthetically, it was a very different film. We'll talk more about how aesthetics can be misleading later. 2 of my favorite critics of all time, the late great Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, had this to say about The Last Crusade.
One thing I will agree with you, though, is that the plots are very similar between this one and the first one. Remember, in the first one, the Nazis were after the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
This time, they're after the Holy Grail.
Right.
And
you didn't get tired at all when they were just going through the story? Didn't you think, gee, I've been through this before,
well,
it's a little loud?
No, I didn't, and I'll tell you what, you've got to realize this is the 3rd in the series. Maybe Spielberg is wise to end it at this point, because we are now familiar essentially with what we can expect. Strange locations, unbelievable adventures.
Snakes or rats.
Snakes and rats and so forth. I like the look of Venice and the look of those catacombs.
Do you remember your reaction, though, to the first one?
The first one was absolutely smashing. It was a great film, but it was also a new film.
A new kind.
It was a new film in the sense that I hadn't seen that energy level before.
Right.
I hadn't seen that technical level before. I hadn't seen Harrison Ford in that role before.
And I felt
there's
I'd
no
seen
way
all
that Spielberg can win with this one. I think it's a very good film.
Well, I felt like I had seen it before.
This is the type of instant gut reaction that The Force Awakens is currently receiving by some naysayers. We've seen it before. It's the same as the original. Years later, The Last Crusade is actually considered by some to be the best film in the franchise, having the visceral action of Raiders along with an undercurrent of dramatic heft with Indy and his father that Raiders simply didn't have. But upon its initial release, Crusade was chided as a tired retread of the original. So let's talk a bit about Star Wars formula. We're now 7 movies deep into the Star Wars franchise, and at this point the formula is obvious. Opening crawl, pan down to space. Every film does it. If Force Awakens didn't do this, a mob would have formed outside J.J. Abrams' house. The opening scene always demonstrates the power of the main villain in the movie. New Hope shows the massive Star Destroyer. Empire has the Star Destroyer sending out probes. Return has Darth inspecting the new Death Star. Phantom Menace has the Jedi encountering the Trade Federation. Clones has the Queen's decoy blowing up. Revenge has Palpatine being rescued from the evil Count Dooku. And The Force Awakens shows the First Order and Kylo slaughter a village. A potential hero is discovered somewhere. Generally, he or she is of a lowly profession who dreams of adventure. Luke was a moisture farmer who wanted to join the rebellion.
You know, the rebellion against the Empire?
Anakin was a slave who hoped to grow up strong and liberate his family and friends.
I had a dream I was a Jedi. I came back here and freed all the slaves.
Rey was a scavenger who collected rebel artifacts and dreams that the stories of old are actually true.
This is a Millennium Falcon. You're Han Solo.
Our hero then meets someone older who teaches them something important about the Force or life in general. Luke meets Obi-Wan Kenobi. Luke meets Yoda. Luke goes to Yoda again. Anakin meets Qui-Gon. Anakin trains under Obi-Wan. Anakin trains under Palpatine. Rey meets Han. Rey meets Luke. There's always an entertaining badass. A New Hope had Han. The prequels had... Darth Maul, I guess? The Force Awakens has Finn and Poe. There's a cute side character. The originals had R2-D2. The prequels tried to have Jar Jar, and The Force Awakens had BB-8. There's always a familial connection. The originals had Vader and Luke as father and son, and the prequels told the origins of that story. And Anakin and Obi-Wan were supposed to be like brothers, I guess?
You were my brother, Anakin! I loved you!
The Force Awakens has Kylo Ren as the son of Han and Leia and the grandchild of Darth Vader. Someone important generally dies, and usually they're the older, wise character. A New Hope killed off Obi-Wan, Phantom Menace killed off Qui-Gon, Force Awakens killed off Han. There's always a cloaked in black villain. A New Hope and Empire had Darth Vader, Return introduced the Emperor, Phantom Menace had Darth Maul, Clones had Count Dooku, and Revenge had the Emperor again. Force Awakens has Kylo Ren. There's usually a space battle with a big ship or weapon. The Death Star, Trade Federation, Starkiller Base. There's always a lightsaber battle. Darth versus Obi-Wan, Luke versus Vader, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan versus Darth Maul, Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Count Dooku, Obi-Wan versus Anakin, Rey versus Kylo. Except for The Empire Strikes Back, every single previous Star Wars film ends with complete finality and barely a single reason to watch the next one. A New Hope ends with an awards ceremony. Return ends with our heroes celebrating. Phantom Menace ends with our heroes celebrating. Clones ends with a marriage celebration. And Revenge ends with baby Luke and a sunset. So what's the point I'm getting at here? The point is that Force Awakens is not the first Star Wars movie to follow a formula we've seen before. Every single Star Wars movie has a checklist with each box firmly checked off. It's just that some do this much better than others. I think the reason Force Awakens is being targeted as a copy is aesthetics. The way the film looks, its visual construct. People tend to be very critical of what they see because that's the easiest aspect to zero in on. Watching Force Awakens, it visually looks and feels like the original Star Wars trilogy. And that was the point. I read a comment that said, the prequels sucked, but I at least respect George for trying to do something different. As we've just discussed, the formula and overall themes of the prequels were basically the exact same as the original trilogy. What was so different about the prequels was the look and feel. Many people have said that the prequels simply didn't feel like Star Wars, and that's because they didn't. But if you actually look at the prequel screenplays, the events that take place, and the beats of the writing, they really are the same story, just with a few characters and elements shifted around. And I don't have a problem with that, because I recognize that's how franchises generally work. If you're still not quite catching my drift, I have a short presentation I'd like to share with you. This next segment was provided by accomplished editor Pablo Fernandez, who has given me permission to use this clip he cut together. The link for his original upload is in the description below. Please enjoy this.
You see the echo of where it all is going to go. It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
So I think it's pretty clear at this point. The Star Wars movies all echo one another. George Lucas himself described them like poetry, with each stanza rhyming. I have no idea why people aren't making this connection. The issue that Force Awakens faces is that, admittedly perhaps too often, it throws in visual nods to the originals, like Finn finding the remote that Luke trained with, or accidentally turning on the game board, or a cantina scene, or putting something secret in a droid. There's also a desert planet that resembles Tatooine, a snow planet that resembles Hoth, and a forest planet that resembles Endor. So not only does The Force Awakens have standard Star Wars themes, it also had visual callbacks. As I've already stated, it's a lot simpler to critique what we see, and harder to think about what we're seeing. Yes, The Force Awakens absolutely pays homage to the originals while also sticking close to a formula, and that's why people said it feels so much like A New Hope, which was clearly the point from the start. Not everyone, but the vast majority were disappointed in the prequels because they simply didn't feel like Star Wars. Now that we have a movie that feels like Star Wars, it apparently feels a little too much like Star Wars. Basically, at this point, I'm not sure it's even possible to please Star Wars fans anymore. So what I'm going to say next might strike some as surprising, because the entire internet seems to think that it's simply a fact that The Force Awakens copies the Star Wars formula without doing anything new. I actually feel that in some ways, Force Awakens changes the formula up. How you say? Let's discuss. In A New Hope, Luke Skywalker meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, and after his family is killed, he decides that he wants to learn the ways of the Force. Obi-Wan takes him under his wing, and Luke is quickly taught about the Force and learns to harness it, faster than Obi-Wan perhaps even expected. However, in The Force Awakens, Rey is already completely self-sufficient on Jakku. She takes care of herself, she makes her own money, and eventually she discovers that she's Force-sensitive on her own, without anyone's help, and digs deep within her to allow some of this to come out. Let's discuss Darth Vader, one of the most badass villains of all time. But let's focus on his character in A New Hope. Imagine that it's 1977 and you just saw Star Wars. You just saw Darth Vader for the first time. What might your initial thoughts have been? Wow, Darth Vader looked so cool, and he was so cool when he choked that guy, and he was so cool with his lightsaber. Man, he was so cool. I don't mean to diminish one of the greatest movie characters of all time, but it wasn't really until The Empire Strikes Back that we learned anything about Darth Vader as a person. A New Hope does hint at a past between Kenobi and Vader in one scene, but for the most part, he's just a badass villain dressed in black. Now let's talk about the villain of Force Awakens, Kylo Ren. What do we know about him from just one movie? He's the son of Han Solo. He's conflicted. He can feel a pull toward good. He idolizes Darth Vader and views him as a martyr, and he's fearful that he won't live up to his idol. He was the catalyst that ripped Luke, Leia, and Han apart. He's young, inexperienced, and his training isn't complete. Even his lightsaber reflects this. It's obvious that a novice without full training constructed it. The core looks unstable, and it's really a mirror image of his unhinged personality. So in many ways, The Force Awakens has crafted a far more compelling villain than A New Hope did in its first outing. It's criminally unfair to say that Kylo doesn't live up to Vader, because we've had 6 movies and endless expanded universe novels and games to flesh out Vader. My point is, if you just take the first movies in both trilogies, one of them clearly did a better job at presenting a humanized person motivated by deep personal feelings. The Force Awakens also humanized another classic Star Wars element: a stormtrooper. This is the first time we've ever really seen underneath the mask of one of these guys. We saw a trooper die in front of him, wiping blood across his helmet, and in just that one visual image, stormtroopers were suddenly people. I love that the First Order genuinely felt like a real operating team, with both the riot trooper and Kylo calling Finn a traitor. Finn's backstory is intriguing, and I can't wait to learn more about him. Let's talk about Han Solo. In the originals, he was a scoundrel, a smuggler. He was cocky, self-assured, and just plain awesome. But he wasn't buying any of that Force crap.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
You don't believe in the Force, do you?
The Force Awakens gave us the chance to see an older, wiser Han Solo. Someone who, when asked about the Force, says,
It's true. All of it.
He's grown, he's matured. Let's not forget about the most important new aspect of his character. He's a father. When he sees Kylo on the battlefield, I nearly lost it at the sight of this beloved, scruffy-looking nerf herder suddenly brought down to earth. Han hasn't been this interesting since he said,
I know.
Also, this movie displayed dark and exciting new uses of the Force, with Kylo Ren traversing the thoughts of his prisoners he referred to as guests, and stopping laser beams in midair. And please don't tell me something like this happened in the books. Here's my collection of Star Wars books. Have I read them all? No. But I know my shit about Star Wars, okay? Okay. The movie also had a wonderfully diverse cast, with guys, girls, blacks, whites, Asians, and Akbars getting equal treatment. It really was awesome to see. And then there's the ending, which we've already discussed briefly. Aside from Empire, every Star Wars movie previously ends with a tightly wrapped bow and a feeling of warm, comforting closure. The Empire Strikes Back and The Force Awakens smartly ended their films with a cliffhanger, keeping the story interesting even after the credits have finished playing and we're driving home from the theater. Does The Force Awakens follow a familiar formula? Yes, it most certainly does. But as I've already explained, virtually all of the Star Wars movies do. I was pleased to see The Force Awakens breathe new life into its characters and take them in surprising new directions. And that's something I must stress. Characters! This movie had fantastic characters. The fact that I watched a Star Wars movie featuring Han, Leia, and Luke, yet found myself more invested in Rey, Finn, Poe, and BB-8 is a major accomplishment. It's also important to keep in mind the position Abrams and Kasdan were in. Disney had just bought Lucasfilm for $4 billion. Really think about that. $4 billion. The prequels had turned many Star Wars fans away from that beloved galaxy. This was not the time to write a script that took place entirely in the Mos Eisley Cantina with Han Solo and Luke Skywalker just chatting for 2 hours. So they did play it safe. And for this reintroduction to the Star Wars universe, I was more than fine with that, and I feel that it was probably the wise choice. With this review, I want to discuss something that I fear is slowly but surely being ignored by many film reviews today. Filmmaking. I can't tell you how many reviews I've read over the past few years that all but entirely avoid mentioning things like camera work, lighting, editing, or the like. Let's discuss the filmmaking on display in The Force Awakens and why I think it's the best directed film in the saga since The Empire Strikes Back. Something that Abrams does very well is keep the camera rolling. Where many directors would feel the need to cut, Abrams combines what may have been 5 different setups for your average film into one. He's clearly very inspired by Spielberg in this regard. Abrams once again does this with The Force Awakens, and not only is it a great time saver as less setups take less time, but it also showcases the brilliant art direction, as multiple viewings will bring out things in the background that really make the location seem real. Something else Abrams did remarkably well was never let the action or amazing imagery outshine the characters. Take this shot for instance. Behind our heroes, the First Order approaches, explosions are right on their tail, but never do we cut away to those explosions behind them to go, "Oh, look at the explosions." Abrams always keeps our heroes in the foreground, and the focus is entirely on their dialogue while also keeping the frame wide enough to showcase how fast they're running. In one shot, we feel the intensity of the action, recognize the looming danger behind them, but don't lose our focus on the most important part. The characters. Abrams, with this film in particular, has proven himself a master at scene transitions. Nearly every scene in The Force Awakens starts with something eye-catching. Rey opens the compartment really fast. Finn wakes up startled. You get the point. This keeps the film moving fast. It's also the funniest film in the saga by far. BB-8 giving the thumbs up with the lighter. Han preferring Chewie's bowcaster. Chewie oblivious at Han being referred to as a war hero. Rey popping in and out of the Millennium Falcon's compartment, the stormtroopers turning away during Kylo's rage. The humor was so fast and so well realized. It was such a pleasure to watch a funny Star Wars film again. Something else I loved was that many of the characters often appear to have a sense of awe when seeing amazing things. This was something the prequels lacked. People walked around these incredible environments but never seemed amazed by their surroundings. When Poe is being escorted out of the ship in the beginning of the film, he stops to look around in awe. Stuff like this is great. It makes our heroes feel like they're in a real place. And it reminds us as viewers that we should be amazed by the world too. Let's talk about something more subtle, the lighting. But we're gonna focus in on one scene, the death of Han Solo. Yeah, that one. Throughout Han's approach to his son, Kylo's face is lit partially in red and partially in bluish white. This helped highlight the conflict going on within him. It was similar to the scene in Return of the Jedi when Luke faced a moment of temptation, but then all the light leaves the room and Kylo's face is drenched in red. The dark side has triumphed and he murders his father. This is fantastic, subtle work. This is honestly something I'm deeply worried about when it comes to film criticism. People, for whatever reason, have begun to drift away from discussing filmmaking. Are they afraid to bore their readers or viewers? I don't know, but it's a frightening development as of late, and it's something I'm trying to avoid here on my channel. Now, something I feel I must stress is that if you didn't like this movie, that's more than fine. I'm consistently baffled by the inability to accept different opinions on the internet. I mean, last year, someone actually said to my face that Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace was his favorite Star Wars character of all time because he's just so cute. My point is, with this video, and really my whole channel, my goal isn't to say, I'm right, you're wrong. This is just an outlet I can use to explain myself, my thoughts, and what I saw in The Force Awakens while watching it. Because trust me, I've already been taken aback by articles written by supposed professionals that come off as highly elitist, a feeling Gene Siskel described as aloof, hovering over the audience, not having a communal experience with everyone else. I mean, look at this title. Admit it, The Force Awakens stinks. They should have just retitled that,
Hey idiots, I'm right, you're wrong. Click on my ads, please.
All things are proven with time. Upon the initial release of The Phantom Menace, many fans were more than satisfied with the experience.
I thought it was better than Return of the Jedi, personally, so they did a good job.
I like the special effects. I thought Lucas did a really good job.
I think that little Anakin Skywalker, and everyone's going to say it, stole that movie.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
God, I'd put my feet up if I could.
As time has gone on, that feeling of euphoria has gone away and the truth has set in. The Phantom Menace was a poorly acted, awkwardly written mess. There were no entertaining characters and the action felt weightless. That excitement and denial I refer to as phantom menacing may have been present in some with The Force Awakens, but not myself. There were multiple aspects of this film I mentioned earlier that I felt could have been improved on significantly, and in some cases completely removed, like Starkiller Base. But that's not to say that The Force Awakens isn't obviously a very well acted movie with very good dialogue, which is something that The Phantom Menace most definitely did not have.
You'll never reach the outskirts in time. Sandstorms are very, very dangerous.
On the flip side, I have a first-hand account from both of my parents that upon leaving the theater in 1980, having just seen The Empire Strikes Back for the first time, many people, including my parents, were very disappointed. It ended on a sad note, with a cliffhanger, and many people at that time considered it a massive disappointment. The Empire Strikes Back is the lowest grossing film of the franchise for this reason. It didn't encourage the returns that A New Hope had. It has only been with the passage of time that The Empire Strikes Back has become well respected as not just a great Star Wars movie, but a great film. In fact, even the critics in 1980 were very mixed on it. To prove this point, here's a quote from the original review from Variety. The Empire Strikes Back is a worthy sequel to Star Wars, equal in both technical mastery and characterization, suffering only from the familiarity with the effects generated in the original and imitated too much by others. At 124 minutes, Empire is only 3 minutes longer than its predecessor, but seems to be longer than that. probably because of the overfamiliarity with some of the space sequences and excessive saber duels between Vader and Hamill. Here's another quote from the original review from People magazine. This movie, of course, is Star Wars 2, and while it's hardly the worst sequel ever made, Exorcist 2 retired that trophy, it's not up to the original either. The spacecraft laser battle gimmicks are familiar now, so even though these are the most special of the special effects, they're no longer fascinating. Worse, the more one sees the main characters, the less appealing they become. The ending is emotionally unsatisfying, though that's no accident. Lucas says this is only the first of 8 sequels, which ought to be enough to wear out the batteries in Luke's light sword. And the Wall Street Journal had this to say back in 1980. And while one can, I suppose, blame an absence of freshness for its lack of power, this too hardly seems crucial. After all, it's precisely because they want more of the same that many viewers will come to Empire in the first place, greeting the appearance of all their old friends with delight. And the New York Times review had this to say. Empire Strikes Back is not a truly terrible movie. It's a nice movie. It's not by any means as nice as Star Wars. It's not as fresh and funny and surprising and witty, but it is nice and inoffensive, and in a way that no one associated with it need be ashamed of. It's all so silly. I mean, was this really the pinnacle of journalism in 1980? The New York Times raves, it's a nice movie. Did you happen to notice a parallel that ran through every one of those initial reviews? Every single one stated that The Empire Strikes Back felt familiar, like a retread. It wasn't fresh anymore. It lacked originality. Rather than actually discussing the film, these reviewers compared it to what they'd already seen and almost came off as wanting to dislike it. So basically, Star Wars movies have been accused of copying off of one another for decades. It's the same tired gripe people have had since 1980. Once you've seen Star Wars, you can never see Star Wars again for the first time. It's as simple as that. The 7 films we've seen in the saga follow a formula, and the ones we have yet to see will perhaps follow it as well. But I do have one last point I'd really like to talk over with you guys. It has to do with a phenomena that has swept the movie community as of the past few years. Put simply, if a highly anticipated film isn't received as a work of utter perfection, it's considered a bad movie. I've seen it happen with tons of films over the past few years, most notably The Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar. Both of the aforementioned films contain storytelling problems and perhaps are not the film we expected when we watched the trailers. But I simply can't refer to them as bad movies because there's so much good happening within them. The filmmaking on display in both of those films is so strong that for me personally, it outweighs what flaws might be present, even though I recognize that they're there. A buddy of mine, Dan Murrell of Screen Junkies fame, gave permission to quote his tweet after he was accused of disliking Jurassic World, yet going easy on The Force Awakens. For those saying I'm cutting The Force Awakens slack that I didn't cut Jurassic World is a bad movie with moments. The Force Awakens is a good movie with problems. For me, there's just too much good within nearly every frame of Force Awakens to discount it for its flaws. It's a terrific Star Wars movie and a marvelously good time. We finally have a new Star Wars film with fantastic characters, excellent filmmaking, and a charming, witty script. Guys, I really truly hoped you enjoyed this analysis of not just The Force Awakens, but the Star Wars saga in general, and perhaps it helps some to understand my viewpoint better. Thank you so much as always for watching my newest analyzed review, and I hope you guys stay tuned for more. And as always, if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.